Excellent. Welcome, everyone. We're just going to give it a minute here as folks get into the webinar. Okay, looks like everybody are getting it successfully. Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle Backus with Rutgers Cooperative Extension. Welcome to our last session of our mashup webinar series of Earth Day, Every Day, and the Marine Extension Program series called Weathering the Storm, Increased Resilience, a Decade After Superstorm Sandy. So I just have a couple of announcements. I'm Michelle Backus with Rutgers Cooperative Extension. We're the outreach arm of the university. We're a partnership between the counties that we serve and Rutgers University, and there is an extension office in every state in New Jersey to help extend the resources of the university into the counties that we serve. This webinar series is just one of the programs that we do. So a couple of items before I turn it over to Jessica. So the first one is that the chat is disabled, and we ask you to use the Q&A to ask your questions. We welcome questions. The Q&A is at the bottom of your screen. You should be able to click that, and it has the two bubbles there. And you can put your questions in there, and the panelists and the hosts will be able to see your questions. You can put your questions in at any time during the webinar series, and then we'll have a specific stopping point for Jessica to answer questions. So if you could, Jessica, if you could go to the next slide. I also want to let you know that at the end of the presentation, well, a few minutes before the end of the presentation, we're going to bring up a survey that with some questions for those of you who have been with us before. You kind of know the deal, but Rutgers University considers you all research subjects, and we have to tell you that we need your consent in order to answer that survey, and then we may send you a follow-up survey asking you what practices you have adopted or that you've learned as part of this webinar series. So if you have any questions about that, the information is here for you to reach out to. And when you take that survey, if you could just indicate at the top of the survey that you do consent to take part in that research study. Okay, next slide. I also want to let you know that Rutgers Cooperative Extension is an equal opportunity program provider and employer. And if you feel that any discrimination has taken place, this is the contact information for you to reach out. And with any of your concerns related to discrimination, the phone number is there, and there's a website there also for you to learn more. Okay, and I think the last thing that I will say is that since this is the last session is this webinar series, I want to let you know that if you have enjoyed this series, then you should feel free to donate to our program. On the Earth Day Every Day website, you can make a donation, and we always appreciate donations that help support these programs and the other programs that we do through Cooperative Extension. Okay, so next slide. Without further ado, I want to introduce Jessica Conway. Jessica is a response specialist supporting NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. She's with the Marine Debris Program, and that's what she's going to be talking about today. She's been with the program since 2015, and she works with the NOAA staff to improve the preparedness of coastal states in their response to marine debris after disasters by building relationships across all levels of government, facilitating collaborative workshops, and developing partner resources. And she has her MS in Coastal Marine and Wetland Studies from Coastal Carolina University. And we are so very thrilled that she is with us this evening. So I will turn it over to you, Jessica.
All right, thank you so much, Michelle, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak during this webinar series. Like Michelle said, my name is Jessica Conway. I'm a response specialist supporting the NOAA Marine Debris Program. I am located in Charleston, South Carolina, but I work nationally on emergency response and preparedness. So this evening, I'll be sharing a little bit of information about our marine debris program's roles with response including our main planning project and how that relates to New Jersey and its preparedness for disaster debris along the coast. So this presentation is going to be broken into two halves with a Q&A session in the middle, or kind of more toward the beginning, just to kind of break it up. So I'll be starting off by giving a quick introduction on the NOAA Marine Debris Program, which you'll see abbreviated as MDP through the rest of the presentation. And then I'll jump into our history with response, starting from when our program was first enacted in 2006 and through Superstorm Sandy, which ended up being kind of a pivotal turning point for us and the future evolution of our response posture. And then again, we'll have a short break for questions, and then we'll follow it up with continued response history from post-Sandy all the way until present day. So jumping right in, I'm going to give a quick introduction and background on NOAA's Marine Debris Program. And I apologize if any of you on the call are already familiar with our program. I don't mean to sound redundant, but I think this really kind of helps set the stage for how response fits into the overall structure of our program. So our program was established in 2006 by Congress, and we serve as the federal lead for addressing marine debris in the United States. And this includes all types of marine debris, from microscopic plastics to large vessels and even storm debris. Our overall mission is to investigate and prevent the adverse impacts of marine debris. While we have grown a ton since 2006, we are still a really small team. I believe right now we only have about 28 full-time staff, and we're spread across the nation. So in order to really drive forward this mission, we've organized our program into different topic areas, or what we call program pillars. So while I'll be focusing on the response pillar for the remainder of the presentation, the program has 5 others that I just want to briefly touch on, including coordination, removal, research, monitoring and detection, which is our newest, prevention, and then obviously response. So I want to spend just a couple minutes kind of stepping through a couple of these other areas before we jump into response. So because our program covers all United States coasts, including the Great Lakes and the US territories in the Pacific and the Caribbean, we have regional coordinators that are spread across the country. So everywhere you see a green pin on this map, we have a regional coordinator, and collectively those coordinators cover the entire US coast, and they focus on projects related to those other program pillars that fall within their respective regions. So I'd like to introduce you to your Mid-Atlantic Regional Coordinator, Katie Morgan, if you have not yet had the pleasure of meeting her. Katie is based in our headquarters office in Silver Spring, Maryland, and she's in charge of partner coordination and projects in the Mid-Atlantic region. So that includes Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, the Atlantic coast of New York, and of course, New Jersey. So she is your main marine debris point of contact. For our other 4 pillars, removal, prevention, research, and monitoring, we offer competitive grant funding opportunities for projects that fall within those categories. So I'd like to highlight 2 active projects that we are currently having happen in New Jersey. So some of you might be familiar with a couple of these projects. All right, so in 2019, Rutgers University, ding, 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 received a research grant from the Marine Debris Program for a project looking at fate and transport of microplastics. So this project will study the movement of microplastics down the Delaware River to the confluence with the Delaware Bay and determine the role this mixing area might have as the entry point for marine plastics in the food chain. So if any of you on this call are part of this project, I'm excited to hear how that turns out, and good luck. And then in our removal section, in 2021, the city of Hoboken, New Jersey, along with Riverkeeper and the New York, New Jersey Harbor and Estuary Program, received a grant for addressing abandoned and derelict vessels in the Hudson River estuary. They are looking at removing 17 high priority abandoned and derelict vessels from the Hudson River. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into that response pillar now, where I'll stay for the remainder of the presentation. So our NOAA Marine Debris Program works collaboratively to prepare coastal United States and its territories for the impacts of disasters like hurricanes, floods, and typhoons that can result in large amounts of marine debris. With the intensity of these types of storms increasing, we need to be prepared to respond. So through the development of emergency response products, coordination with regional partners, and scientific support, our program works to improve the response to and recovery from acute marine debris incidents. So one thing to note about that word acute that I highlighted there, I just want to point out that our response section focuses solely on debris that is generated as a result from some kind of acute or point in time event, and doesn't necessarily hit on those chronic types of debris like cigarette butts on the beach or plastic straws that some of the other projects in the other pillars focus on. And the debris that we focus on can be caused from both natural disasters or human-caused disasters. So a quick background on marine debris response and kind of how it fits into the general timeline of disaster response. So typically, marine debris response occurs over 3 phases: preparedness, that takes place prior to a disaster, and then response and recovery. So after a disaster, the response phase occurs in the days and weeks following the event. So in terms of marine debris, the most likely actions that will be taking place at this time would be things like clearing shipping routes for safe navigation or responding to marine debris that's a pollution hazard. So it's not typically until this longer term recovery phase that the attention and the resources really start to shift over to marine debris. Even though we use the term response very broadly, it kind of captures this recovery section as well. The Marine Debris Program does, however, work across all 3 of these phases. And later, when I get into our planning project, I'll be referring specifically to the preparedness phase, which takes place prior to the event. All right, so now I'm going to move into our history with response from the beginning of our program through Superstorm Sandy. So as our program was just in its infancy, before our Marine Debris Act was even signed, Hurricanes Katrina and Rita both hit the Gulf of Mexico in 2005, only 1 month apart from each other. It was a record-breaking hurricane season that generated an overwhelming amount of marine debris for the Gulf of Mexico. Much of it was hazardous. And at this time, unfortunately, we didn't have a real role or a congressional mandate for how we could or should handle this type of disaster debris. But due to the magnitude of these 2 storms, Congress did give us supplemental funding to aid in our partners' response efforts, but we didn't yet have a good understanding of our own marine debris capabilities. So one of our major roles for this was actually working with our NOAA Office of Coast Survey partners to do a lot of mapping for identifying sunken targets, and then also modeling for debris hotspots, similar to the picture on the left. A major lesson learned was that Katrina and Rita, it really would have been helpful to have guidelines for the state to help them figure out how to address such a widespread issue. But those things were really scarce at the time. So in 2009, NOAA produced an emergency response planning document for the North Central Gulf of Mexico that incorporated lessons learned from these 2 storms. And then in 2011, an earthquake caused what we now refer to as the Japanese tsunami. And this event caused a major debris issue for a couple of reasons. First, just the multinational jurisdictions. There was debris from Japan months later into 2012 even, starting to wash up on US shorelines. And 2, there was a lot of fear and uncertainty around this debris. What was going to show up? When was it going to show up? Where was it going to show up? And what's the impact both to the environment and to human health and safety? So this really highlighted our need to prepare for these increasing number of debris generating events. That led us to create state-specific response guides for the states that were impacted by the tsunami. So Oregon, Washington, Alaska, Hawaii, and California. And those guides were specifically focused on tsunami debris. Those guides also became the basis for our current response guide project, which I will talk about in the second half. So into 2012, we were working on interagency coordination and response guide planning for the hurricane, when all of a sudden, in 2012, the largest hurricane on record hit the New York, New Jersey coastline on October 29th. And I know I don't need to tell any of you about the impacts of Sandy, because I'm sure, as I did, you experienced it firsthand. But Superstorm Sandy was in many ways a catalyst for change for our marine debris program. So I'd like to highlight some of the impacts and lessons learned. So when Sandy first hit, we were still a very small team, still trying to figure out how we can best support our partners during a response. And because of the magnitude of damage, we ended up receiving money from Congress to help out our state partners, helping them address marine debris that was resulting from Sandy. We still performed some modeling for debris hotspots, like the photo on the left, but a lot of the money actually went toward debris removal, which was the first time we were really able to put this supplemental funding toward removal and disposal of debris. And Sandy's recovery phase lasted for many, many years, as I'm sure you all know. So one of the biggest lessons learned from Sandy was that all of this mapping and modeling that we were doing isn't really helpful to our state unless there's removal that can happen immediately afterwards, especially because the nature of marine debris, it moves. And so we encourage our partners to not wait to identify marine debris after a storm, because it's always at risk of moving and even potentially causing more damage. However, it can be really difficult and logistically challenging to get money quickly after an event to remove debris. It can be difficult to get reimbursed by FEMA, and our supplemental funding takes a really long time to get into the hands of the people who need it. So we learned that where our program can really help out is with interagency coordination and providing resources. So we began researching information on agency roles and responsibilities and removal processes, and starting to compile that into a kind of quick to reference resource. Those West Coast guides that we had been building were good, but they were too narrowly focused on tsunami debris to be helpful for Sandy. And we wanted every state to be able to have a guide with information that could help them recover more quickly from future storms like Sandy. So given the large scale impacts of the tsunami and Hurricane Sandy, it was clear the Marine Debris Program needed to come up with a more consistent and structured plan for future response. Luckily, in late 2012, as a result of these events, Congress actually reauthorized our act and included response-specific amendments for the first time. So specifically, that language was to develop interagency plans for the timely response to severe marine debris events. And severe marine debris events is now an official definition, and it's something that NOAA has the ability to declare, including plans to coordinate across agencies and with relevant state, tribal, and local governments to ensure adequate, timely, and efficient response. So this mandate really helped guide our program's present-day response efforts and gave us the authority for our largest collaborative project. So if we were to kind of pick out the most important milestones in our program's journey and history with response, it would probably look something like this. Like I mentioned, Superstorm Sandy and our reauthorization were really the catalyst for change in our response posture. They led to the development of our collaborative response guide project, which began in 2014. And this is the project that I'll be spending the majority of my second half of the presentation discussing. But I wanted to pause for a couple minutes and kind of naturally break here at Hurricane Sandy and have a couple minutes for a Q&A session before we get back to it. So I'm not sure, Michelle, if you were going to facilitate the Q&A or how that's going to work. So I will defer to you.
Yeah, there are one or two questions. So the first one is, I don't know if you're familiar with the marine debris in Florida, but there is a question here about Florida from Kathleen. What is being done to respond to the current Hurricane Ian and the number of abandoned and improperly moored boats in the Fort Myers area of Florida? What will be done with the boats? Why aren't these boats removed from the Gulf prior to the storm hitting that area?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do want to point out before I give an answer, I have invited my colleague, Jason Rolfe, who is our response coordinator for the Marine Debris Program, to join because he is, well, one, he was here before I was, so he has a lot more history with the program, but I'll defer to him for some of these if I can't answer them myself. But to answer your question, we are actively involved in response to Hurricane Ian and Fiona in Florida, and we are working with the other federal agencies who have stood up command posts to try and help provide best management practices and information on agency roles and responsibilities to help with debris removal. But your second question is kind of one of the issues, and it's what has led us to the project that I work on. So you said, why weren't the boats removed prior to the storm hitting? Historically, that has been a huge issue for many reasons. So usually vessels have either been derelict to the point where an owner is not able to be found. And if an owner can't be found, it ends up being the state's responsibility. And it's just very expensive. It's logistically challenging. It's a problem that's continuously happening. And it's just not easy. I know Florida does have a program for abandoned vessels, but it's, one of those things where it's like trying to catch a moving target. So I will pause, and Jason, please just come off mute if you wanted to add anything else, but otherwise I can keep going.
Okay, well, in the meantime, there's some other questions we'll go through. Any issues with the undersea explosion, the Tonga undersea explosion, which they just announced? Are you seeing, is there any potential for marine debris from that?
I have not heard of any reports of marine debris coming from that.
Okay.
But again, I will defer if Jason has heard otherwise.
Okay. Another question from Brooks. What is the budget for cleanup? Is it an annual budget or event-specific act of Congress?
Yeah, so this is highlighting the other concern with responding to marine debris, which is that it's expensive and there's rarely money for it. So because we are a small program and we are not regulatory, we don't get base budget for funding for debris removal itself. That's why we focus on coordination and planning and modeling and things like that. We do, however, get supplemental funding from Congress if there is an event that's big enough scope. And that number depends on the need. So we have debris calculation estimates that come straight from our partners and what they're seeing in their neighborhood and how much that'll cost. The other part of that is when there is a large enough storm, the president can declare a major disaster, and that will trigger federal response that also comes with money. So FEMA will reimburse for debris removal if eligible, which sometimes can be, again, logistically challenging to get that eligibility kind of checked off, but FEMA also provides funding for that. So it's mostly, it ends up being up to the state or up to the county even to get their planning, done, so they have something in place, so it's not overly time consuming or expensive when this happens.
Okay. Another question from Bill, wondering how involved Japan was in cleaning up the tsunami debris on our West Coast. Do other countries get involved?
Yeah. Japan was incredibly generous. And I think, given their cultural, background, and they felt bad that their debris was washing up on our shore. We actually did receive $5 million that the country of Japan gave to us to help with cleanup efforts. So that money did go toward removing debris. They were definitely involved.
Okay. Okay. And then last question, it's actually for me. How do you model for debris hotspots? What is considered what is a debris hotspot?
Yeah, so I will start off by saying that I am not a spatial data analyst. We have a whole section that does all of that. But I can tell you that those types of estimates usually involve the topography, the geography, and I think sometimes like social demographics of the area. So it can kind of predict based on land development, for example, if there's a ton of stuff in one area, it's likely that area will generate a lot of debris. And then we also look at currents, wind-driven forces, and kind of can predict where debris might end up based on atmospheric forces.
Okay, interesting. All right, folks, we're going to let Jessica keep going so she can get through her talk. These are great questions. Please go ahead and continue to put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll curate them as they come in.
Thank you. And yeah, those were great questions. So you guys are you're on it, and I'm a little scared, but so far I think I hopefully have been able to answer them for you.
Yeah.
So with that being said, we'll jump back in, and I will talk a little bit more about how Sandy kind of helped evolve and shape where we are now and what's happening present day. So picking back up where we left off, I'll be transitioning into talking more about that collaborative project that I mentioned, the Regional Response Guide project that started in 2014 and falls within that preparedness phase that I mentioned earlier. So the overarching goal of our response work is to improve the preparedness for response to and recovery from marine debris after disasters in coastal states and US territories. And so again, this includes a response after natural disasters like floods and typhoons, as well as maritime disasters such as an overturned container ship or even an accident at sea. Our preparedness work focuses on coordination and relationship building before a disaster hits to ensure that communities feel prepared with information and resources they need to respond to marine debris, and that they also know where to turn when they have questions. The keystone preparedness resource that the Marine Debris Program produces are these Marine Debris Emergency Response Guides. So these resources outline existing response roles, responsibilities, jurisdictions, and authorities at all levels of government into these state or territory specific guidance documents. These response guides are focused on response to debris that's a solid material, and that does include vegetation, since oftentimes after a storm, you'll see a lot of tree limbs or large pieces of docks, things like that. That's a result of a disaster and poses a threat, whether to public health and safety or to the environment. And this can include shoreline and wetland debris and debris in some inland non-tidal waterways. So why did we decide to kind of focus all of our attention, and not all of it, but a lot of our attention and resources on this project to create these state-specific response guides? So first, as we learned from the tsunami and from Hurricane Sandy, it's really important for responders to have all the information they might need in a single location. So we basically work to compile existing information and synthesize that down into one existing resources. So we'll take information from state documents, from federal documents, from local documents, and kind of put all of the pieces of the puzzle together in one resource. We are also hoping that this work, including the final published documents and its associated outreach, will help clarify agency roles, especially since response to debris in the water can be a lot more complicated and logistically challenging and more expensive than debris on land. And then inevitably, there will be challenges and gaps when it comes to response and available resources. And a good example of this is that there's not always funding available for debris removal. So we feel that it's important to identify challenges before a disaster so we can discuss them and everyone's on the same page during a response. In regards to the target audience for these resources, So while the response guides are publicly available and they're posted on our website, the general public isn't the target audience for these guides. So response guides are developed for use by the response community, and that includes all levels of government, as well as non-governmental organizations and private organizations who may have a role in marine debris planning, response, and removal. And if anyone's interested, I put the website at the bottom of this slide. So through the development of these products, the network of marine debris response partners has grown throughout the country. So since our first publication in Alabama in 2015, the response guides have now been developed to cover 13 states and territories, with an additional 5 in development. And so those are the pinkish color that you see there. So one of those in development resources that I mentioned is actually a national marine debris emergency response guide. So by developing a national version of this product, NOAA will be able to more quickly meet the needs of those states and territories that don't currently have a response guide, while also supporting marine debris response stakeholders that are working either nationally or regionally and might not have a state-specific interest. In coastal states and territories with an interest or need for additional local resources, the national guide can serve as a jumping-off point for coordination. And we anticipate that this guide will be published by the end of the year, which is coming up soon, and we're excited about that. So this slide illustrates the typical process that we follow when developing one of these marine debris emergency response guides. And one thing I really want to emphasize is that while NOAA leads the development of these products, this process is highly collaborative with local partners who are engaged throughout. And again, our partners are at every level of government because we really try to pull in the people who will actually be using this product. So I will step through some of the phases of this development process, and I'll use the New Jersey guide as my example. So when developing a response guide, the process typically begins with background research, and that includes literature reviews and then one-on-one partner engagement, either via phone call or email. So for the state of New Jersey, this process actually took place between the summer and fall of 2020. After individual organization roles are discussed and we feel like we've met with everyone who plays a role, we bring all of those stakeholders together for a workshop. So during this workshop, agencies and organizations have an opportunity to share their roles with each other. They also provide feedback on our draft resources and begin to discuss challenges and needs. While these events are typically held in person, COVID had other plans for us and prevented us from doing so in a couple of states, but we were able to quickly translate our in-person agenda into a highly engaging, I hope, virtual format. So New Jersey was actually the second workshop that had to be held virtually, and that occurred in 2 parts on January 6th and January 13th of 2021. So to the right there is just a screenshot of a few of the attendees that were able to hop on camera for part 2 and greet each other virtually during the workshop. So coming out of the workshop, we then complete a draft of the document using all of the feedback that we gathered from our partners at the workshop. And then that draft gets distributed back to our partners for a final review and comment. And then once all comments are incorporated, it gets published to our Marine Debris Program website. So in New Jersey, that guide and its accompanying field guide was published in October of last year. So it just celebrated its 1-year anniversary. So one important thing that I want to note is that our process does not stop at publication. So the process continues beyond publishing these documents. The contact information that's featured in each guide is updated annually. And it's actually quite timely because the New Jersey guide is undergoing its contact update right now. And then a full review of the content happens every 5 years for each of our guides. Additionally, we are also interested in hosting and participating in any exercises on this topic, just to help ensure that the responders who will be using these tools understand them and know how to use them. So I'd like to take a moment just to acknowledge all of the help and the coordination from the agencies that were involved in the New Jersey development. Like I mentioned, this process is hugely collaborative, so we do our best to engage with every agency from all levels of government just to help produce resources that are going to be really beneficial to the state. So this is written with the state for the state. All right, so now we will open up the New Jersey guide and take a look at what information and what tools are included. While guide information varies from state to state, this slide highlights the key components that are most commonly included in each of the state documents. So I'll step through each of these sections briefly, and I'll use New Jersey as my example. So each response guide begins with a brief introduction section, which walks readers through the purpose and the scope of the response guide, both functionally and geographically, and also outlines the guide's maintenance schedule. Response guides also include a background risk section, which walks readers through most likely disaster types that could result in the introduction of marine debris, as well as some common debris types. And whoever had, I think, the question about modeling, so this section is kind of where that comes into play. So we'll outline, I think you can see the image of New Jersey there. This is an agricultural map. It shows where there's development areas, where there's wetlands, agriculture, and that kind of, informs us on what type of debris is likely to occur in New Jersey and where it's likely to happen. So the majority of the document is focused on outlining individual organization roles and responsibilities, including, again, all levels of government, NGOs, and even private landowners. So the majority of this is written out in text format, but we did create some one-page handouts that can be used out in the field that kind of just display the same information, but in a more visual way. And one of those is this response flowchart. So I know this is really overwhelming. I don't expect you guys to actually be able to read any of this because it's so small. But basically, this flowchart serves as a decision tree for waterway debris response. So it organizes agency roles and responsibilities and kind of how they fit together or overlap. And so this follows a series of yes or no questions based on the type of debris that you might be looking at or inquiring about, and it'll give you basically kind of next steps or information on who might lead this response, depending on what type of debris it is and where it's located. So I'll step through just a couple of the features of the flowchart for New Jersey. So at the top right hand of the flowchart, there's a key, because every good chart should have a key. And this just explains what those color-coded endpoints mean. So for example, anything in the blue shaded area, those endpoints refer to debris that is not a pollution threat. Anything in yellow refers to debris that is a pollution threat. And then any endpoints in that green shaded area at the bottom indicate a response that's occurring under Stafford Act authorities, which just means that there's been a major disaster declaration and further federal response is triggered. So FEMA, for example. So next I'll zoom into the beginning of the flowchart for New Jersey just to give you kind of a sense of how the tool works. So for each debris item of interest, you would always start with the green start arrow, and then you're asked the first question. Depending on the debris item you're interested in, you say yes or no, and that'll either lead you to an endpoint or another question. So for example, the first one here is the debris in a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers federally maintained waterway? So let's say you answer yes to this question. My debris is in an Army Corps channel. Your next question says, is the debris contaminated with oil or hazmat? So if you answer yes or no, regardless, it brings you to an end box. And each of those boxes, whether yellow or blue, are going to give you some next steps and some more information about what that response might look like. So the response guides also include jurisdictional response maps, which highlights key organization jurisdictions. The map is presented in static form in the document, which looks like the photo on the right here. And we are also excited to share that all of our state maps are now included in NOAA's online IRMA application, which can be used as a common operating picture during response. And it looks something like this. So basically, this is kind of a spatial data platform online. You don't need a login or anything to be able to view the response maps. The link to New Jersey is at the bottom of the screen. This is a screenshot, but basically you are able to zoom in, zoom out. You can toggle different layers on and off, and this will give you information about which agencies have the authority to respond in which areas. So I'm sure many of you also might be familiar with environmental compliance. Before any debris removal work can begin, there are environmental compliance or permitting requirements that have to be met just to make sure that natural resources aren't impacted when you're doing removal, right? So nobody wants to be dragging a large vessel through a sensitive area. So we do outline in each response guide the compliance requirements for that state. And we also include with that a one-page summary handout that can be pulled as kind of a quick reference. And this is what that compliance handout looks like for New Jersey. The top portion of this is basically the process that you would need to take if you need a permit or to stay in compliance with those state or federal environmental regulations. And then the bottom of the handout goes over some of those agency contacts that you might need to consult with and a little bit more information on what is required. All right, so during our response workshops, stakeholders spend a lot of time thinking through their local, state, or territory marine debris response challenges or needs. They then participate in an activity to identify actions to address these challenges. So for New Jersey, even though our workshop was held virtually, we still did this exercise in the form of breakout rooms. So each of the guides includes a summary of those challenges and needs, along with the recommended actions to address them, which serve as a next step for coordination. Categories of challenges vary pretty broadly from state to state, but some examples from New Jersey vary from planning and coordination challenges all the way to challenges with the final disposal of marine debris. And these challenges serve as a really good touch point for the development of future tabletop exercises or activities. So as an example, in the state of Delaware, they hosted their own debris summit where they specifically looked at the recommended actions from their response guide, and they made a whole workshop out of just figuring out who's going to lead these actions and how can we take our next steps. And then finally, and probably most importantly, the appendix of each document includes a list of contact information by organization, which is updated annually. So this would be any contact that participated in our guide development process who wishes to be featured in the guide. And really, this is helpful not just for us to be able to know who to contact if there is a storm, but within the state, kind of putting faces and names together. If you have a question about a certain capability, you have contact information at your fingertips. And then in addition to publishing the full comprehensive guide that included all of the information I just stepped through, we also publish a shortened field reference guide, which basically just includes the most important handouts that I went over, things like the flowchart, the contacts table, the permitting handout, things that could be used out in the field during response. So it takes all of the most pertinent information and puts it together into a field guide. So next, I'll review how these response tools have or could be put to use by responders. So I'll start with how the Marine Debris Program's preparedness resources were used during response to natural disasters, followed by integration and linking of information. So between 2016 and 2018, our Marine Debris Program preparedness resources were used during response after 5 different hurricanes that you'll see kind of listed, overlaid on the states on the map here. Those resources were used at FEMA-led joint field offices and at state and Coast Guard-led incident command posts. We also received feedback that our resources were used to help figure out agency roles and responsibilities, as well as during environmental and historic preservation consultations and vessel removals. And then during the very active 2020-2021 storm season, our resources were used in response to 5 different hurricanes, mostly affecting the Gulf of Mexico. However, you will see that Hurricane Ida is labeled on the map in the Atlantic region as well, since it kind of swung up and caused severe flooding in both New York and New Jersey. In this case, the response guides were used at FEMA-led joint field offices and by state-led debris task forces that were focused on removing vessels. One of our long-term project goals is to have this information included in the guidance documents, linked or embedded into other agency documents to increase accessibility and visibility of information. So one example of this are the U.S. Coast Guard area contingency plans, which focus on pollution response. So Sector Charleston and Sector Mobile's area contingency plans both feature links to their respective states' emergency response guides. Okay, so I spent a lot of time discussing our preparedness efforts, but I do want to highlight some of the work that we do during actual response and recovery of these storms. So during a response, our main role is to support other state and federal agencies. And we do this mostly through coordination and information sharing. And this is just another example of how the preparedness products can also be used during response and recovery. So, you know, they use the flowchart out at the scene or in a command post. So we do our best to kind of share any information that's helpful as events are unfolding. We also provide best management practices for removal and even offer resource advisor trainings to help coastal land managers better protect natural resources when they remove debris. Additionally, I work with our spatial data colleagues to perform, or I don't, I ask them because I do not have a background in spatial data, but they help us out with mapping and debris assessments. And we also offer support and environmental compliance expertise to make sure that responders are staying in compliance with federal and state regulations. Sometimes the Marine Debris Program will deploy to the site of an event to assist in incident command posts, joint field offices, or emergency operations centers. So we do make sure that our staff is fully trained to deploy. And finally, as part of the longer term recovery efforts, like I mentioned before, we do receive supplementally appropriated funding from Congress after some large scale disasters to assist our partners financially with the removal and disposal of marine debris. So for those of you who might not be involved in the response community, I'd like to share some additional information and resources on how you might be able to contribute to New Jersey's marine debris preparedness efforts. So first and foremost, check out our website. We have a ton of resources on there, specifically a storm preparedness fact sheet. And that will give you some information on what you can do to prevent marine debris, whether you're a homeowner, a boat owner, or a member of a marina. Additionally, in New Jersey, the state's Department of Environmental Protection, DEP, has a hotline where you can report environmental incidents or emergencies. Clearing debris prior to a storm is also really important. I think someone already mentioned this with Florida and the vessels. It's really important to remove debris so that they don't get displaced or cause more damage when a storm is coming through. So if you're looking to help, consider joining a volunteer group like Surfrider who do regular beach cleanups. And then talk with your family or your workplace about having a hurricane plan that includes information on prevention of storm debris. So things like making sure you tie down your trash cans or safely storing any hazardous materials that you might have in preparation for a storm. And finally, You can help increase the awareness and accessibility of information by sharing the New Jersey Marine Debris Emergency Response Guide with any organizations that might have a role to play in response. In the 10 years since Hurricane Sandy, we hope that the Marine Debris Program's capabilities and our preparedness efforts have set up local, state, and federal agencies to more effectively respond to these severe marine debris events. Every storm in every state is unique, but the lessons learned from Sandy really catapulted our nation into a more prepared posture and highlighted New Jersey's resiliency. So with that, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me speak tonight, and I would be happy to try and answer any more questions that come in.
Thanks, Jessica. That was really interesting. I know personally, I don't know a lot about this topic, so there was a lot for me to learn. So some questions have come in. One of them, the new wind turbines going up along the mid-Atlantic. Has there been any sort of planning for marine debris response for them if potentially they get damaged, or if there are any issues for them impacting the coast?
So I don't know if I've heard specifically of any issues that have come from the wind turbines, but I will say if that were to happen, I think the information in our response guides, it's still applicable, even though it's not technically a natural disaster. And that's because what we outline in our guides is existing information about the state's authorities and jurisdictions and kind of response structure. So, you know, whether it's debris coming from a storm or any piece of debris that happens to tragically fly off a turbine or it hit something, that process is likely going to be the same as it would if there was, you know, severe flooding that day or something like that. So I think our guides are still helpful in that way. But I don't think we've encountered any very specific examples of wind turbine generated debris.
Okay. Another question from Bill. The fiberglass vessels that are, that make up, I guess, a lot of the debris, how are they dealt with? Is there any sort of recycling program or any way to recover those?
Also a good question. This tends to be state by state. Some states do have programs in place, and it just comes down to how that state handles their disposal recycling facilities. It's really, really tough to dispose of fiberglass vessels. I think breaking it down as small as you can has been a best practice, but again, this highlights the fact that, these are challenges that happen everywhere in every state. And some of the recommended actions and discussions that we have at our workshops are geared toward this. So these are discussions that response communities are having and that we're trying to kind of be involved in to offer any support that we can.
Okay. Before we go on to the next questions, folks, I did want to let you know, I see that people are taking the poll. Thank you so much. For folks who haven't started the poll, go ahead and please answer the questions that are there. Thank you for that. Okay, another question. You mentioned in one of your slides that there are removal best management practices. What would be an example of, what would be something that you would want to avoid? What would be some of those removal BMPs?
Yeah, so we actually offer a whole training on this, and it goes over everything from, specific salvage techniques. So just making sure that as you're putting equipment into the area, you're aware of any sensitive habitat, any endangered species that are in the area. And NOAA has a bunch of resources to help with that. ESI maps, environmental sensitivity index maps, will give you an idea of like what's in the area. It also goes over environmental trade-offs. So sometimes you have to weigh the pros and cons. If I leave a vessel, does it cause less damage than if I remove a vessel? And so we do offer trainings on that, and we do have a pretty in-depth best management practice guide as a resource on our website. So I would strongly recommend checking that out. But basically, it's really looking at the not just the removal, but how you get there. Sometimes it's tough because you might have to like bulldoze through a marsh to even get to the debris that you're trying to remove. So it's keeping those types of things in mind and kind of weighing off your pros and cons. What's the best option here?
Okay. And you've mentioned a few times that you guys do trainings and workshops. If there was an organization or someone that did want those, what would be their first step?
Yeah, feel free to reach out to us. We can definitely, one of the things that I think we do best is try to connect people. So we have contacts for state trainings, and we know people that host those. We have our own trainings. Our sister division does a ton of training if you are in that community, a natural resource manager. So reach out to us, and we're happy to kind of connect you to where you need to be.
Okay. All right. Okay, so unless people are saying thank you, that this was a great seminar, if there are any other questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A box. But Jessica, I want to thank you for an excellent seminar. This was really interesting, and I think a great way to kind of wrap up our fall seminar series. I also want to thank Doug Zemeckis and Steve Yerjo and Amy Rowe and Sal Mangiafico, my coworkers, for putting together a really good, what I thought was a really good seminar series. And we hope to do other mashups with other programs in the spring to bring together different stakeholders. That was the idea. We all do these kind of separate webinar series, but we wanted to kind of come together on a few topics. So thank you everybody that participated in the whole series. Also, all of the recordings are on our website, the Earth Day Everyday website. So we already see people have been really watching them. The numbers have really gotten up there. So that's really gratifying to see that people are taking advantage of those recordings. All right, and so I guess I'll let everybody have the rest of their evening, and thank you again, Jessica, for participating.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a good one.